Hello.
Hello, Leon. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Clearly, you're South African.
I am indeed. I think that funny accent gave it away, didn't it?
Where in South Africa are you?
I'm from Cape Town.
Okay, great. I've been to Cape Town. I love Cape Town.
Have you?
Yeah.
On holiday or business?
No, it was holiday.
Super. Yeah, it's a
And
beautiful city.
I've been to Joburg. I've been to Durban, Umhlanga Rocks. You know Umhlanga Rocks?
Yeah, I know Mhlanga Rocks well. It's a beautiful shore break to surf in there and a lovely part of the country.
Oh, it's amazing. It's amazing. So I noticed that you have some rather epic pictures of elephants behind you. Is that, I'm assuming, because maybe you took that picture?
I did take that photograph, indeed.
Okay. So tell me, what do you do? Who are you? What's your story? What's going on?
So I'm Chris Fallows. I'm a fine art wildlife photographer that specializes in photographing the planet's most iconic species.
Amazing. You must have some rather interesting stories to tell.
I do indeed. I've had one of those incredibly privileged lives where I've lived my passion my whole life. And by spending time with wildlife, I've learned a lot of important life lessons. And like you, been given a lot of incredible privileges by traveling the world and seeing these amazing animals. And for me, my focus going forward now is seeing what I can do to give back to them.
So what are some of the lessons that wildlife has taught you? There's a very famous quote, which I'm sure I'm going to completely butcher, but there's a famous quote from Einstein, which he says that if you want to understand yourself, look at nature, right? And clearly wildlife are intertwined with nature. And sometimes when I do my journeys, and let's say I'm in a hotel, I'll turn on the TV and I'll put it on National Geographic or whatever, and I'll watch these kind of stories about lions and tigers and everything. And I realize how similar they are to us. So Einstein was right. But anyway, what kind of lessons do they teach you?
Well, I think there are a lot of virtues in terms of what you've said. I think at the end of the day, what you realize when you've spent time with these animals is they're all out there just trying to survive like we are. A lot of them have got very closely knit social units. A lot of them are under huge pressures, when there are things like droughts from predators, even from their own kind. So you begin to understand the intricacies of each species that you work with. And I think, both in a marine and terrestrial environment, you learn that it's exactly the same. If you look at whales, for instance, those social and family bonds are incredibly important to them. And then, you cross over into the terrestrial environment, and elephants are exactly the same. If you look at the bond between a mother and the calf, or the mother or a matriarch and a herd, it's unbelievably strong. And, it often made me really realize that we have so much to learn about trying to not only treat our own kind better, but better understand the lives of nature and respect them, that at the end of the day, they have as much right to be here as we do. And, I think a great lesson in this world is to coexist. And to quote another famous person on this planet, Mahatma Gandhi, who said, you judge a country by the way it treats its animals. And, I think that's an incredibly important virtue. I think nowadays in many cases, we've lost that feeling of compassion. Life is so fast. We're always out there chasing the next buck or the next car or whatever the virtue that you're after. But, I think in many cases, we've lost that tremendous feeling of just caring for things. And if you look around at nature in so many different facets, nature really cares for its own kind incredibly well. And, you look at an animal like a wild dog, and wild dogs have got this reputation of being these crazy animals that rip everything apart. But, it's actually far from the truth. They never kill anything for pleasure. It's always for need. They work as an incredible team and unit. They're always looking after the weakest link. And these animals, when they kill, they bring back for the young and the sick. And those are tremendous qualities that I think we as humans could aspire to in many respects. And one of the animals I've spent more time around than any other in my life, and it's probably the most misunderstood creature on the planet, is the great white shark. And, I think if we look at the newspapers and tabloids around the world, how they report these animals as mindless killing machines, when you spent as much time around them as I've been privileged to do, you see a very different side to that animal. You see an animal that for the most part wants to have nothing to do with us. An animal that, once again, when it kills, it doesn't kill for pleasure. It never wastes anything. And, in the marine environment in which it works and survives is a very difficult and hostile environment in which that animal lives. And just like all of us, if you put 20 people together in a room, you would have those bold and assertive types. You'd have a shy and retiring type. You'd have a goofy type. And it's exactly the same with great white sharks, unbelievably. They've all got strong personalities, be they shy and retiring or bold and assertive. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things when you work with animals for any length of time. You begin to identify with those personalities and what makes them truly unique. And for me, it's been the most unbelievably humbling life I could ever have been gifted of having.
It's very profound what you just shared. And I'll tell you a little story and why I felt the profoundness in your words. I was in Tanzania a while back, and we went and we were swimming with wild dolphins. And I only got a very small glimpse of this one dolphin, right? But I saw into his eyes. And I don't know, maybe he saw into mine, but I definitely saw into his eyes, right? Or her eyes.
Yeah.
And there was something so magical about that moment, that like connection with something that, like, whatever is breathing me, whatever is living me is also living the animals. And when you have that connection, which clearly you have all the time, right? Because you're out there with them all the time. It takes you beyond the simplicity of just, oh, humans are the best, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There is so much more. I had another experience like that. And again, you've had many more, but I had an experience like that at San Diego Zoo. I was looking right into the eyes of a tiger. Thankfully, there was a screen, so it couldn't eat me. But I had that moment again that I had in Tanzania, that like magical moment of connection. I don't know. Clearly you've had those moments, but how did those types of moments transform you? Like, I see the picture behind you of that elephant. Seems to be looking right at you, right?
Yeah, it is. And I think one of the most amazing things is when you earn the trust of an animal, that it feels comfortable enough to bring its entire herd that close to you. I think you reached a certain point in your life where you've gained a greater understanding of those animals those animals' environment, and you've learned how to respect them and respect their boundaries. And in so doing, they give you the pleasure and privilege of allowing you close to them. And in a situation like that, for me, to be that close to one of the last real great female tuskers in Africa is an unbelievable privilege. For me, it's kind of walking with kings and queens. These are the last great ones of their kind. And you look up at that animal and you think what we as a species have put them through, and yet they tolerate me in such close proximity to them. It's a deeply moving experience, And I think one of the great things for me when I work with wildlife, and I'm very lucky, my wife joins me and we share the same passion and values. And we go to very remote places. Usually we guide ourselves and we're on our own. And for instance, when you're in the central Kalahari in Botswana, it's an area of 55,000 square kilometers. So it's the size of several small countries. And there may not be another human within 100 kilometers of you. And it's just the two of us. And at night, the lion prides walk around where our little tent is. And you lie there and you really realize that you are feeling the same things our ancestors did 10, 20, 30, 100,000 years ago. And you feel those vulnerabilities and that same insignificance they felt. And, you really connect at one with nature. Your senses are heightened, and it's the most beautiful thing. And, when you wake up in the morning and you relive those experiences, I think, it's a wealth of an experience that you can't quantify in financial terms. It's one of the most powerful things you can ever have. And it connects you with where we came from. And I think in modern society, so many of us have lost that, either by choice or by circumstance. And I think that's one of the most important things with my work, is to be able to share that unbelievable privilege I have of getting into these environments with these iconic animals, and to share that with people, that hopefully it inspires them to not only go and see these animals for themselves, but also realize that they're vital to our own well-being, they're vital to our planet's well-being, and at the end of the day, most importantly, they have every right to be here just like we do.
I agree completely. And I'd like you to explain, because for many people, they may not understand why they're so vital. So
Sure.
Can you explain why they are vital?
Well, absolutely. I mean, if we look at ecosystems as a whole, if we look at forests produce, take a huge amount of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. The same thing with our oceans. So the oceans and our forests are essentially the breathing organs of our planet. So if we take the emotions out of it, just for our survival, they're vitally important. If we look at what animals do, it's the ocean, for example, provides humanity with a huge amount of its food. So if we don't keep that in balance, we essentially will eventually starve to death. On a terrestrial environment, animals keep ecosystems in check. When ecosystems run rampant, you get famine, you get disease, you get all sorts of things. So if you take a huge amount of predators out of the environment, you'll have an explosion of, for example, antelope in Africa. You'll have overgrazing. Once you have overgrazing, you have soil erosion. Once you have soil erosion, you have sedimentation of rivers. And when that happens, you have a cascade effect in all sorts of different components. So I think the balance of nature is vital to our own well-being on this planet. And I think you can never underestimate just how important that balance is. There was an amazing study done on the wolves and elk in California. And what it showed was, when the wolves were all shot out in Yellowstone National Park or removed, what happened was that the elk populations really started expanding. And when those elk populations started expanding, they started heavily grazing areas. They started moving down. They were typically higher up on the flanks of the hillside and countryside there. They started moving down into the valleys. They started grazing more heavily in those valleys. The young trees that were coming up, they didn't get a chance to grow. Those were grazed. And eventually those trees with their root systems used to hold the soil intact and ultimately shift the course of rivers, because that soil was so intact. And when these elk started overgrazing everything, suddenly the course of the rivers started changing. So if you think of things like that, if you're downstream of that river and you're using that river for irrigation of your crops, for example, or you rely on the fish that are in that river, that entire ecosystem is altered by removing those predators. And that's just one small example, but the same theme runs throughout nature. And I think it's just, to our own detriment, whether we love animals as I do, and clearly you do, or we just want to look after our own food security and well-being, they are vital to our planet, And when you start looking at how global warming and climate change changes things, those tiny effects that we trigger by what sounds like, small amounts, you hear 1 degree, 1.5 degrees, they have a catastrophic effect. For example, if you look at something as simple as a crocodile, the eggs hatch at a certain temperature, and the temperature dictates whether it's a male and female, and a tiny little switch in that will determine the sex of those eggs. And there are so many examples like that. Or in the ocean, if temperatures start rising, corals don't survive, certain fish species don't survive, and the whole thing changes. I mean, if we take it to a far larger level, a small rise in temperature obviously creates melting of the ice, and we certainly have heard of what's happening, in northern latitudes in the Arctic. The same thing's happening down in the south, but that leads to rising sea levels. And for many people, they think, what's half a meter? But if you live in a country like the Maldives or some of the South Pacific Islands, a half a meter essentially means your country is inundated with water. So small changes lead to huge changes elsewhere. And a classic example of that is this very area where I took this photograph behind me is an ecosystem called Amboseli. It's in the southern part of Kenya. It's on the northern flanks of the famous Mount Kilimanjaro. And when I'm photographing these elephants, I stay with the Maasai in that area. And over the years, we've become very good friends with them. And we essentially live with them, and we interact with them during their own nomadic lifestyle. And over the years, I've watched how, their cattle is essentially their greatest wealth in this world, their cattle and their goats. And those cattle and goats, along with the wildlife that's in the area, the zebra, the wildebeest, the elephants, are all nourished by the glacial runoff from Mount Kilimanjaro. And those glacial waters come down and they create a marshland, and everything feeds there. But over the last 10 years, every year I've gone there, I've looked up at this white crown of Mount Kilimanjaro, and I've noticed it's getting smaller and smaller. And it's nothing that these people are doing there. It's what we're doing in our large industrialized cities with huge amounts of pollutants, CFCs, and, fossil fuels that are causing these massive changes. And for these people, their way of life, if we don't change very quickly, is shortly going to come to an end, as will those entire ecosystems. So I'm sure with your travels, you've seen a similar thing, over the years. It's just how quickly changes are happening. And no matter what you hear on TV, like you, I've been lucky enough to, go to many very different and wild places. And the changes you're seeing and how quickly they're happening are truly eye-opening. And it's something we all need to really make personal decisions to make individual choices and changes in this world. And as a collective, we can make a great change.
I think that part of the challenge is that, specifically when it comes to animals, is that many of us think that we are different from them. But clearly, when you go and you spend the time and you spend the proximity with these animals, like you have done and I have done to a certain degree, and as I'm seeing the picture behind me of this elephant looking at me, I realize that we are the same. And as you said earlier, and how do we get people, apart from looking at your images or apart from going out and like really being connected to an animal one-on-one, to feel that we are the same? Because if you feel like you're the same, you'll want to do something about it. If you feel like we're different and there's no consequences for them disappearing, you're just going to continue doing what you do. And you're not going to have that moment of awakening inside, right? Where you realize that we are the same. And until you do that, things are going to continue being bad. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think to a certain extent, at the end of the day, we as a species on the planet, as Homo sapiens, are all the same. But if you look at how we treat each other in different parts of this world, at the end of the day, it's pretty lousy and poor. And I think what it comes down to at the end of the day are two things. I think you need to have people that, stand up for these animals and actually show them for what they are and showcase the true side of them. So, for example, I'm not saying it's a scary experience and it's terrifying being near this elephant and how brave I am. I'm saying just what an unbelievably, surreal, peaceful and emotional experience is. And I think that transition of how we interpret the wild from just being a big thrill to see these animals to rather being an amazing experience, a one-on-one connection, transcends that divide between them being different to us. So I think that's a starting point. And then I think, to really make people aware of just what we were talking about earlier, in so much as if we destroy this world, ultimately we're destroying the very balance that keeps this planet going. And these animals in so many different aspects are vital to it, And I think that is really important. And then, I hate to say it, but I think, the digital world has moved us further and further away from the natural world, in so much as, you can create your own reality, and it's a virtual reality. And, nature has so much to offer. And I think, just for people to go and experience walking in a park amongst trees, or going down and listening to rivers washing over stones, or watching waves breaking, there's just a sense of calm that comes over you when you do these things with nature. And I think that calm is pervasive into changing the way we see each other, and, just removes us from this disconnected and digital world. I'm not saying that the digital world doesn't have certain elements that are conducive to progress, but I also think that you need to have a balance with it. And you also still do need to have that connection with nature that gave us, so much of where we came from.
You said something earlier. You said you were in a tent and there were lions outside the tent, and you felt that people were feeling 10, 20, 30, 50,000 years ago. And I could relate to that because I live in nature, and I was sitting outside my house, sitting on a chair, just being in nature. And the exact experience that you had with the lions, there were no lions here, right? I don't think. Maybe some coyotes, but no lions. But the exact experience that you had of feeling the way that people felt 50,000 years, 60,000 years ago in nature. No phone, no computer, no Instagram, no Twitter, nothing. Just nature. And it's life transforming to have those moments.
It really is.
Yeah, because you realize the matrix that we live in, right? And that we are consumed by. And we think that's the truth. That's part of the truth now, right? But we think that's the truth. But the real truth is just being exactly as we were meant to be.
Absolutely, Leon. I mean, I think one of the most beautiful things about what you said is the complete change that washes over you when you immerse yourself in nature. I mean, another side of it that's, another huge bonus for me is that when I'm with nature, in many of the places I go to, I have no connectivity with anything. So there's no cell phone connection. There's no WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, whatever you may be into. And I'm completely disconnected with the problems of the world and my own problems to a certain degree. And for me, it gives me this unbelievable release and peace that is hard to describe. The world is the most wonderful, wonderful place. If you're not constantly bombarded with Boris Johnson's now left, and you've got problems with this war, and there's issues with a strike in that country, and there's fuel shortages, and there's this, and all these things that bombard our daily lives. When you're with nature, you have none of that. You are connecting with the sound of those birds in the tree. You're aware that you can hear hippos in the distance. You know that the thunder that's rumbling means you need to get into your tent and batten down the hatches for later. The smell of the first rains touching the scorched earth in Africa, that overwhelming sense of celebration. It's just the most incredible thing to find harmony and peace. And, it's I think that if more people engaged in that, they would probably be more productive in their own lives, because of the release it gives you a chance to inhale, catch up with yourself, find out what's really important to you in life, and then move on with focus.
And I would say that it allows our nervous systems to rest, right? Now, I'm not so sure how your nervous system is at rest when you're in a tent and there are lions outside, right? but generally, if you're in nature and you're not about to be eaten by a lion, and it's not an extreme situation, right? You get to rest, and your nervous system gets to rest. I decided a couple of months ago to stop watching the news, right?
Yeah.
So I don't watch the news anymore. I used to watch the news every morning, every afternoon, every night, and my life was so anxiety-ridden. And by stopping to watch the news, I have these moments. Like I said, I live in nature, right? You talked about listening to the birds. I listen to the birds, right? I listen to like the rabbits, and as opposed to listening to the chaos, it just like makes you feel more grounded, makes you feel more connected, makes you feel more human, right? That was actually a point I wanted to make. You had mentioned it earlier. Don't you feel when you're out in nature, when you're taking these pictures, when you don't have WhatsApp, when you don't have Instagram, that you are more connected to who you truly are, what you were meant to be?
100%. I think one of the things I yearn for more than anything in life, and I'm lucky in South Africa, my wife and I, we live in a nice enough house. We've got a car. We've got everything we could possibly want. But I crave being in that little tent in the bush with nothing, because life is so simple. It is so beautiful. And truly, when I say I want for nothing, I genuinely want for nothing. As long as I've got water and I've got food, just that peace and that harmony you get is just it's almost like a drug and an addiction, because it is so different to what we consider normal in our natural lives. So absolutely, that I don't want to say the disconnect it creates when you move away from the digital maelstrom we live in, but it really is an amazing, amazing release. And I know, when people hear you talk about birds and rabbits, they think, well, this guy's gone off his rocker. But at the end of the day, if everybody just went and spent 10 minutes in a garden or in a park and just listening, put your phone on silent and just try that, like you say, the chaos goes away. And it just gives you balance. It just centers you and, makes your day or your problems that little bit easier to cope with.
Indeed. Look, I have to go back to the tent and the lions. You were in a tent and there was a pride of lions outside the tent. Did you not feel like you were going to be eaten?
No, and I'll tell you why. It's because I'm now 49 years old. I've done this pretty much since the age of 2. I was very lucky as a young boy to be taken to a lot of Southern Africa's game parks. And right from my earliest of memories, I've been comfortable with wildlife. And as soon as I was able to in my late teens, I started going to a lot of the parks myself and then going to the more adventurous ones and kind of carved out a career working with sharks and wildlife. And it's what I'm comfortable with. And by having more and more exposure to those animals, I was able to kind of pull back that veneer of the preconceived ideas that we fed about these animals. And I realized, as long as I'm respectful to them, pretty much all of them want to have very little to do with me. And in most cases, I'm nothing more than a curiosity. It's almost insulting how little interest they place in us as humans when you really just, become part of the environment. And I think, that's why when there are lions outside the tent, yes, that instinct in you immediately is made aware that there's something out there that is far more powerful than what you are. There's something out there that can kill you if it wants to, and you are just inherently, and probably goes back to our ancestors, aware of that. But it's not something that's overwhelmingly frightening. In South Africa, we live in a country that has 24,000 murders a year. And as beautiful as the country is, when I walk through the dark streets of big cities in South Africa, I am far more afraid than when I'm free diving with great white sharks or walking with lions or, interacting with elephants. Simply because if you really look at the numbers and the statistics, we're in far more danger with our own kind than we are with these animals. And it's just something I guess I've grown up with. It's like a Formula One driver. If you ask Lewis Hamilton, isn't he terrified every time he climbs into a car? You'd probably turn around and say to you, no, it's what I grew up with. It's what I'm good at. And it's, where my skill lies. And I think I've just been very fortunate to be given the gift of nature from a very young age and have grown ever more passionate about it. And, the camera is the extension of my creative element. And, it's also a challenge being out there to capture these iconic photographs. And I might take, I used to spend upwards of 200 days a year on the ocean and close to 100 at sea, and 100 on land. And, I might take one or two truly, truly exceptional photographs in a year out of thousands and thousands. And it's that constant quest, that's the challenge. And that's what, keeps you cognitively stimulated, but also figuring out your environment, figuring out the behavior of the animals, knowing when and where to predict certain things, understanding the composition that takes a photograph from good to great. And when all those components come together, it's a very rewarding experience. And also, to have these close encounters with the animals, it's exciting. It's an addiction, and it's just the most wonderful thing, to, as I say, walk with super athletes and see these incredibly formidable creatures that are the result of tens and 20s and 30,000 years worth of evolution, 100,000s, millions in some cases, if you look at the great white shark and a few others, and to be tolerated in their company, wow, what a privilege.
What is one of the greatest moments of connection that you've had with an animal?
I think one of the ones that immediately comes to mind is actually quite recent. It was last year at a place called Bird Island, which is near Port Elizabeth on the southern coast of South Africa. And we were working on a documentary there for Discovery Channel on great white sharks, and I was free diving with them at the time. So that entails no cages. It's how I generally like to work with them. And I was on the seafloor at the time, and there was one shark, not a very big animal, maybe about 3.5 meters in length. So I don't know what that is, 11, 12 foot long. And she kept on coming close, really close to me and investigating me. And I had my camera, and she was probably about 2 foot away. And then she would come up to me and then do these beautiful vertical ascents up to the surface, I wasn't deep. I was probably in about 40 foot of water. And I watched her this first time, and it just looked so incredibly beautiful, her swimming up towards these angled rays of light, and with a bit of foam on the surface. It looked like the sky. So it looked like she was transitioning from ocean to air. And I thought to myself, you know what? I might never get another chance like this in my life. I'm going to swim with her. And I kicked off the ocean floor, and I went up with her holding my camera, and she just didn't even change her course. And we just swam in beautiful synchrony right up to the surface. And then she came down and went off. I went back to the surface, and she came back, and I did it again with her. And it was just this wonderful moment where I felt the connection. I'm not so sure she did, but it was just this wonderful, beautiful moment where I was with this animal so capable of turning around, biting me in half and swallowing me in 2 gulps if it wanted to, but shared its space with me in its world. And yeah, what a wonderful moment.
It's amazing. It's like my moment with the dolphin times 50 million.
No, not at all. They're all special. Dolphins are one of those animals that I think people just generally gravitate towards because they've had a lot of good press. I mean, let's call a spade a spade. But it's an animal that is always a feel-good encounter. We see them a lot where we work in False Bay in South Africa and elsewhere. And whenever you come across them, no matter if it's a young person, an old person, a person that's never seen wildlife or doesn't have much interest in wildlife, when they see a dolphin, you just watch a smile light up on somebody's face. And yeah, an encounter with a dolphin is wonderful because not only are you, interacting with another mammal, but you're interacting with a mammal that's in a different element, yet there's so much, in common with that animal. It's breathing, it's got lungs, it gives milk to its young. The mother's got this protective feeling with its calf. the adults keep the young in the middle of the school. And yeah, it's like this moving culture that you watch going through the water, and instantly you look at things. And as humans, we love to anthropomorphize things, but you instantly look at it and you say, look at that mom with its baby. Look at that male protecting her. Then you see the signature whistle that each dolphin is emitting. And you know that that's that animal's peculiar accent that it's talking to the others with. And, there are all these little things that over time you begin to pick up. And the more complex the picture becomes, the more exciting it is as you learn more about how everything is actually interconnected. So dolphins are very, very special animals. And, you can't but have a good time with them.
Absolutely. So let me ask you, what is the greatest lesson? I mean, this may be a tough question, but maybe not. What is the greatest lesson that animals can teach us?
I think for me, and coming back to what I was saying earlier, is that, in most cases, they never kill for pleasure. They only kill for need. And I think that is really important, is they don't waste. In nature, you can't afford to waste because you never know when your next meal is coming. So I think that is one of the biggest things I've ever learned. And it applies to all ecosystems, generally, and there are rare exceptions, don't get me wrong, but generally you always see a balance. And that balance is what keeps everything in check. If one animal were to constantly waste, you would have a breakdown in the structure within that ecological pyramid. So never wasting and never killing for pleasure is generally holds true throughout both marine and terrestrial ecosystems. And I think that to me has been really, really important. And then also, I think something that sounds very simplistic, but that everything that's living actually has a feeling of some other description, Even something as powerful and seemingly invincible as a great white shark, if you reach out and you prod a great white shark, it moves away from you. If you move towards and you quickly push your hand towards its eye, the eye rolls back. These animals feel a lot of things that we as humans don't give them credit for. And I think, you learn that these animals all have feelings. You learn that you can't just dive straight in on their space. Just like if somebody came and suddenly walked into my living room and came and sat down and started watching the rugby or the football with me, I'd say, well, who the hell are you? But yet in many cases, wildlife tolerates us, but you need to understand and learn where those boundaries are. So, it's also a case of you learn respect. You see how every animal kind of knows how far it can push the boundaries and where those boundaries are. And it's this lovely dance. It's like pas de deux of each trying to shape its own space and its own survival within its own ecosystem. But there's so many checks and balances that have been there for, millions of years. And I think that's a beautiful thing, that everything is balanced.
What I just got from that is that there's so many similarities. But the biggest difference is they strive for balance, and there's no waste, you're saying, in nature to a certain degree, yet humans have gone insane when it comes to waste, right? The majority, the wealthy nations, right, have just gone insane.
Absolutely. And I think there's also an inherent desire to always conquer. In nature, animals are happy with what they have. We always seem to want to have more. And I'm an example of that, jeepers. How many cameras do I need? We've all fallen into that trap along the way. But in nature's happy with what it's got. It's designed to live within its own boundaries, and it doesn't constantly try and exceed those. And I think that's also a very important lesson. The irony is, I focus on photographing iconic species because these are species that are well known to us, but in many cases, there are very few of them left. And the reality is that, it's our pressures that have kind of pushed these animals to where they are now, in many cases heading towards extinction. And, if we had a greater understanding of our world, we would never, I don't think, have done that. In nature, you don't see one species pushing another one to extinction. It doesn't happen. I'm sure there's someone out there that's far smarter than I am and will say, well, there was the Bolivian bottle fly that did it to Jackson's green plant. I'm sure that they're out there, but for the most part, it doesn't happen. There's constantly a balance, taking only what you need, because you never know when that rainy day is coming.
I've got one more question for you. It may be a bit odd.
Yeah.
But I feel called to ask it. and for the people who can't see the elephant, I can see, because many people will be listening to this and not watching it on YouTube or wherever they watch it. Right. It may be odd for you as well, but I'm going to go for it.
Yeah.
When you were sitting, I assume you were sitting. Were you sitting?
Yeah, I was actually crouching.
Okay, so when you were crouching and taking this picture, what did you feel like the elephant was saying to you?
I'll tell you what the elephant was saying to me. Is the elephant was saying, I know you're there. I know that you're intruding into my world, and I'm coming up to you to tell you this is the boundary. You come no closer. And that's what she's telling me. She hasn't rushed up to me. She hasn't charged, but the posture that she's in, she's come up to me comfortably, but she's saying, this is the boundary, go no further. And that I respect. With the females, they're looking after their herd. That is their sole charge in life, to make sure they get their herd to food and to water and keep them away from danger. And as such, these matriarchs are incredible animals. They've pretty much seen and gone through everything, and you really have to respect their boundaries. And that's what she's telling me. She's saying, I'm tolerating you, but this is the boundary, go no further.
As you were sharing that story, I had goosebumps.
It's a great privilege. It's a great privilege to do what I do. And, for me, even when I look at these photographs, even talking about it now, I get goosebumps as well. It's no matter how many times you do it, no matter how many incredible once-in-a-lifetime experiences you have when you work with wildlife, every time you look at that photo, it triggers the memory of that time. And, I think I'm one of those rare people that if I sadly was to die tomorrow, I would have absolutely no regrets for all the amazing times I've had with animals. And I just truly wish that more people could have them. And I hope in some way, the photographs inspire people to go out there, see them for themselves, or at the very least understand we live on a very special planet, and it's a great privilege to be able to share it with so many incredible creatures.
Truly beautiful. Let me ask you one last thing. I want people how do they find this specific photograph? Because what you just explained about the elephant and the connection that you had and the non-verbal clarity that was being shared with you, I want people to look at this specific picture. How do they find it?
Leon, the best way is to either go on my Instagram, as much as I hate to say I've got a social media tag. It's at Chris Fallows Photography, or on our website, which is chrisfallows.com. And, I think what's important for people to know is all our photographs are part of an extremely limited edition collection. And all the funds, bar those small amounts we actually use to travel and go get more photographs, we're actually putting towards buying land for rehabilitation and rewilding in Southern Africa. My wife and I don't have kids, and that's our legacy going forward, to hopefully give back to these animals. But there's a story behind every single photograph, and they're up there on our website. And, more than people buying the photographs, which obviously would be great, but I think more importantly, I'd like people just to look at them and hopefully, have an appreciation of just what an opportunity it is to coexist and protect our biodiversity and do everything we can as individuals. Through your travels, you've seen the pressures people face all around the world, and you can see what one act of kindness can do in an area, or what one individual can do to be that small seed that grows into a huge tree. And I hope in some way when people look at the photographs or share the photographs, it can add to the efforts that so many are as individuals doing around the world to protect our biodiversity, and hopefully really push for people to put action to their words. We really need to do that.
Chris, thank you so much. Truly beautiful. I'm not going to forget the image of that elephant, and specifically because of what you shared about how you had that communication with the elephant. That is a profound thing. So keep doing what you're doing. Thank you very much. And maybe one day we'll meet in Umschlange Rocks.
That sounds great, Leon. We'll have some fun with some dolphins there. But thank you very much for the lovely interview and hearing your stories. And obviously I did a bit of research into what you do, and you're a very inspiring individual that's also making huge changes to hopefully a better world and a greater understanding and more compassionate interactions with each other. So thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much, man.
Hello everyone, it's Leon here, aka The Kindness Guy. If you like my videos, which I hope you do, don't forget to press the subscribe button and also to ring the little bell so that the notifications notify you that I have a new video out in the world.